About 15 years ago, maybe a little longer, I was in my early 20s and I was living the I'm gonna be famous someday life. I was never a good student and I was always the class clown. One thing that I always did well as a kid was make my friends laugh. Instead of going to college or getting a job right after high school, I decided I was going to become a stand-up comedian. Spoiler alert, I did not become a famous comedian, which maybe is the best joke of my stand-up career. Instead, I had nearly a decade of bombing on stage, and even worse than that, the most terrifying single-handed experience of my life happened to me. For a little bit of context, doing stand-up is hard and definitely not lucrative when you're not successful. Not to mention, stand-up comedy was not as popular as it is today. To say it is a grind is an understatement. You question your decisions every time you perform until you get that one crowd that laughs at one of your jokes. The high you experience from the crowd laughing and cheering is intoxicating, and I assume that's why comedians constantly keep grinding. Part of the grind is finding gigs that will pay you or even just let you perform for a couple of minutes. I was fortunate enough to have several open mics in my hometown, but you're not getting paid at an open mic, and a lot of the time you're sharing the stage with all sorts of other talented people, and not just comedians. Nothing kills a comedian's momentum like performing after someone who just poured out their soul with life-altering poetry. After a few years of performing at open mics, I decided to try to reach out to club promoters and local comedians who would get booked for actual shows. Most of the time, these shows would be several hours away if I were lucky. Usually, they were even further than that. I did a few shows, and this is where the grind gets real. It's also where my story takes a very terrifying turn. I didn't have very good luck with these traveling shows. I wasn't getting paid, and I was driving 4 or 5 hours across state lines just for 5 minutes of exposure. Not an ideal situation for someone who was broke and barely had any income coming in. One night, I had an amazing opportunity to perform at a show that was being held 5 hours from where I lived. This show was a competition for comedians trying to break into the mainstream. The first place prize was $1,000, but the real prize for me was that several moderately famous comedians were going to be the judges of the show. It was my chance to show actual comedians that I have talent. The worst part for me when I would make all these trips was that I had a garbage car and an old cell phone that was about as reliable as those big 1980s brick cell phones. I would always think to myself that if something happened, I would be stranded. My drives almost always consisted of nothing but farmland and open fields as far as you could see. Because I was a lazy person, I didn't bother to double-check my printed-out MapQuest directions. Instead, I decided to wing it, something I still regret to this day. I was lost. The directions I had did not match where I was. I had been on a backcountry road for some time, and I had no idea if I was even heading in the right direction. Thankfully, I always left for the traveling jobs early, just in case I got lost. I may have been lazy, but I know myself well, and getting lost was not uncommon for me. It was still daylight when I started driving through a small town. Honestly, calling it a small town might be a stretch. There were a few beat-up old buildings and houses on a street that was maybe a couple of 100 feet in length. Outside of an old gas station, there were a few individuals who looked less than welcoming. I know that's kind of rude to say they were dirty and mean, but they were rude to me. They didn't look like they were using or anything like that. They just looked like they'd been beaten up by life. I asked where I was and tried asking them if I was on the right track. They were short with me, and after an awkward back-and-forth exchange, they finally told me where I needed to go. According to the rude townspeople, I was still somewhat on the right track. Somehow, I had missed a turn a while back, but if I stayed straight on this road for a while, eventually I would see the road I needed to be on. I thanked them and filled up my tank before I set off again. While I was pumping the gas, I noticed several of the people I had just talked to were staring at me. It was uncomfortable for sure. It was those dead-eyed stares, and it wasn't just one of them. I counted at least 4 of them just staring and standing completely still like a statue. It made me feel all sorts of weird. I finished up and got out of that small town as fast as I could. I started driving and rehearsing my routine to myself. I kept thinking about how ironically funny my conversation with the townspeople was, and I even tried thinking of ways that I could incorporate this experience into my stand-up routine. Not long after leaving the town, a beat-up white pickup truck flew by me going very fast. I didn't think anything of it at the time. When it was around dusk, I had been driving for nearly an hour since I left the town. There was nothing but trees on the left and right sides of the road. I had that gut feeling that I was probably lost. As I continued down the road, I heard a loud sound from underneath my car, and I started losing control of the vehicle. I knew right away what had happened. It was unmistakable. I had somehow gotten a flat tire. I pulled over to inspect the damage. I couldn't believe my eyes. It wasn't just a flat tire. Both of my front tires were completely obliterated. When I leaned over to take a closer look, I noticed that the tires were impaled with several nails. I pulled out my terrible cell phone, and of course, the service was not good. I tried calling a tow truck, but I had no idea where I was or even what road I was on. I hung up the phone. Instead of panicking, I was starting to get angry that I was going to miss the show. I was stupid, and my priorities were elsewhere. I decided to call one of my friends. I described everything that I remembered about the drive, and I told him about the small town with the gas station. He told me he was going to try to look up where I was and that he would call me back. I didn't know if I should just stay put in the car or if I should try walking back in the direction of the town. I decided to stay put in the car because now that it was almost completely dark, it was starting to get cold. It was clear now that I wasn't going to make the show. While I was waiting to hear back from my friend, I noticed two bright headlights popping out from the horizon behind me. The headlights stopped moving a good distance from my car and didn't continue in my direction. The car was close enough that the lights were bright and annoying, but far enough that I could not tell what kind of car it was. I don't know if it was a cop or some local trying to call the police to report a vehicle on the side of the road. If you're wondering why I didn't just call the police, it's because I was driving a car that was not inspected or properly insured at the time, and I wasn't trying to get that ticket in another state. Several minutes went by, and the car never moved. It just stayed parked a good distance behind me, shining those bright lights. After probably a good 5 minutes or so, the bright lights started to get a little closer. The vehicle was slowly moving towards the back of my car. As that was happening, two more lights could be seen in front of me, making their way toward me quickly. The loud vehicle stopped inches from my car. Eventually, the car that was behind me was parked directly behind my car, and I still couldn't tell who it was. While I was trying to adjust my eyes to the bright light in my rearview mirror, I noticed that the car doors from the vehicle in front of me were now open. That's when I noticed it was a white pickup truck, the same beat-up white pickup truck from earlier. Before I could notice anyone coming, I heard a loud bang on the driver's window, and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was the rude man from the gas station. I started to panic because the man was trying to open my car door. Even though it was locked, he was aggressively pulling on the door. He started to beat on the car window. I wasn't sure how long my window would last before it broke. As this was going on, I noticed one of the other men from the car make his way to the passenger side of my car. He also started to aggressively try to open the door. I was trying to yell at them to stop, but it was like they didn't understand what I was saying. They were just grunting and smashing the car doors. The guy at the driver's door stopped trying to break in for a moment, and instead just stood there staring directly at me. It was just like those vacant stares from the gas station earlier. I can't even begin to explain how horrible that moment was. With no notice at all, he just started screaming.
And it wasn't just a normal scream. He was howling and screaming at the top of his lungs. I don't know what came over me at that moment, but I decided that the best course of action was for me to just try and get out of the car and run. I pushed open the door as hard as I could, and thankfully it was enough force to knock the man over. I ran as fast as I could into the woods, but instead of running blindly into the pitch-black forest, I decided to dive to the ground only several feet into the woods. I hoped that these guys would think I ran deeper into the woods, and thankfully that's exactly what happened. Moments later, I heard footsteps of several people running by me. When I was sure I heard all of them run by, I quietly got up and ran back to my car. Surprisingly, my backpack and cell phone were still in the car. I grabbed them, stayed low, and just ran as fast as I could down the road. The entire time I was running, I expected them to jump out of the woods, but I never saw them again. About half an hour later, I was able to flag down a passing car. The woman was uncharacteristically kind. I don't know if I would have been so nice and trusting of a screaming man in the middle of nowhere. She called the authorities and even let me sit in her car until the police showed up. I told the cops everything, but as you might expect, there really wasn't anything they could do. There was no evidence of anything malicious other than some small dents in the car door, and given the condition of my car, the cops didn't really believe the dents were caused by them. I also received a couple of tickets from my car, which is just the icing on the cake for this story. I never found out why those people targeted me or what they wanted with me. Clearly, they were not trying to help. All things considered, I'm lucky that I'm here telling the story. All I can say is just be careful out there. You never know what people are capable of, especially when no one's around to witness. I feel like I'm still not right from what happened to my two friends and I last summer. What was supposed to be an awesome girls' road trip turned into a nightmare that I'm not sure I'll ever fully get over. For a little bit of context, I'm not a spontaneous person. I'm one of those people who has to have everything planned very far in advance, and even then, every little detail needs to be accounted for. It's annoying for some, but it's just how I operate. In late June, I broke up with my boyfriend, who I had been dating for 5 years at that point. It was a messy breakup. One of the things that got me through the breakup was that my friend Sarah had just dumped her boyfriend as well. Having someone to spend time with who was also going through the same situation was such a blessing. Strangely, our bonding through misery and grief helped us both to move on. A few weeks after the breakup, our friend Alyssa invited Sarah and I on this cross-country trip she was going to be taking. Ordinarily, I would never do something like that. The anxiety alone would be enough for me to melt away. But for some reason, this time it sounded like a fun girls' trip. All three of us are fortunate enough to have jobs where we can take time off for a trip like this. Alyssa basically lives on the road. She's always traveling and finding these insane places all over the country. She's the type of woman who will just throw a sleeping bag down in the dirt and sleep under the stars. She's always been such a free spirit and lives for adventure. Sarah and I were much more sheltered. We decided to let Alyssa basically be the captain of our little crew for the trip. She planned it all out, and we were all going to be there for the ride. The first day or so was a little rough for me. I just wasn't used to winging it, but after that, I started really enjoying myself. On the second or third day, we drove by this insane-looking barn. It was definitely abandoned. There was no sign of human life anywhere. The farm looked like it had been completely overgrown by nature. Alyssa was begging us to go inside, but I wasn't feeling it. Alyssa was adamant that clearly nobody lived there. She was obviously correct, but I just couldn't bring myself to trespass. It's also worth noting that I'm just a huge baby. Not wanting to trespass was my excuse, but I was actually scared of someone squatting inside the barn. I had listened to one too many true crime podcasts, and I wasn't about to get kidnapped by some insane backwoods farm man. After a few minutes of arguing, Alyssa gave up, and we decided to keep moving on with our trip. The next week of traveling was amazing. We went sightseeing all over the U.S. countryside. Alyssa showed us places and things that were truly incredible. We partied in bars and small towns, slept on a mountain, and met awesome people from all different walks of life. It really was incredible. The only thing that was a little annoying was that throughout the entire trip, Alyssa kept bringing up that barn. It seemed like any time she could work it into the conversation, she did. While we were driving back to civilization, Alyssa basically begged us to get a closer look at the barn. I don't know if it was the trip that made me come out of my shell a little bit or just days of Alyssa breaking us down, but I was starting to warm up to the idea. I told her that if it looks like nobody had been there in years, then we could check it out. I was confident that most likely nobody had been there, but I just wanted to make sure I put that in the universe. I wasn't even 100% sure that Alyssa could get us back there, but that girl is amazing sometimes. She knew exactly how to get there. We spotted the barn around 4:30 p.m. We drove the SUV on the dirt and grass and parked several yards away from the barn. We didn't want to park right on top of the place, just in case some scary farm man was living inside. Alyssa was like a kid on Christmas. She ran to the barn door first. It was crazy in that place. I'm pretty sure the vines were holding the building up. It almost sounded like the place was breathing, but I'm pretty sure that was just the integrity of the building slowly falling apart. The weirdest part was all this strange equipment that was still inside the barn. It didn't look like any farm equipment I've ever seen before, but I'm not a farmer, so maybe it was just older stuff. It looked like stuff you would find in a medieval dungeon. After we explored and took a bunch of pictures inside the barn, Alyssa wanted us to check out the farmhouse that was connected. At this point, I was fully invested, so she didn't have any pushback from me. We had to kick down the door because it was somehow warped into the frame, and it wasn't opening. Inside, it was both creepy and sad. It was definitely empty and abandoned. It's not like the previous owner had furniture and stuff like that. Inside, it was empty other than a small green table and a green wooden chair. What was sad was that I couldn't stop thinking about the people who were most likely lived there before. I mean, it was a farm at one point. Somebody had to have lived there before, and now it's just forgotten by history. We explored the house, and I imagined it could have been a cute little house at one point. After a while of just hanging out and talking inside the small house, Alyssa and Sarah both made a crazy suggestion. They suggested that we stay inside the farmhouse that night. Obviously, this seems like it would be a horrible idea, but at this moment, it seemed wild and exciting. And at this point of the trip, I was here for it. We'd been hanging out there so long already that I didn't realize it was almost 7 p.m. We went back to the car and grabbed our stuff. We ate some subs from the cooler, then drank a few beers and talked about the trip some more. Around 9, we started setting up our sleeping bags. We all set our alarms for 6 a.m. so we could get right on the road in the morning. We were all exhausted at this point, so it didn't take long for us to pass out. I'm a right sleeper, so I was tossing and turning for a while, going in and out of consciousness. I must have finally fallen asleep briefly, because around 3 a.m. something strange woke me up. I swear I thought I heard someone make a shh sound. I rose from the sleeping bag and scanned the room the best I could, with only the moonlight faintly shining through the blinds on the window. I didn't see or hear anything. My best guess was that either Alyssa or Sarah had just been snoring or something. I laid back down and shut my eyes. Almost instantly, I jumped up because there was a loud bang at the door. It was like someone crashed into the door. And remember, we had to break down the door, so it was basically just propped up against the door frame. If this really was a person, they could easily just push down the door. The banging on the door was loud enough that it woke up Alyssa and Sarah. Both were just as startled as I was. We all sat there frozen, basically holding our breaths, listening for another sound. Instead of a loud bang, we started to hear these soft and delicate taps coming from the window, which was on the other side of the room. Then the banging on the door started again. This wasn't the wind or the creaky barn. This was for sure people who clearly knew we were inside. We all huddled up together and panicked. It's easy to say what you would do in this situation, but I promise you, you would probably be paralyzed as well. The banging on the door stopped, and then the door was pushed open. 2 skinny men and 1 skinny woman walked inside. I would say all of them were maybe late 30s. They didn't rush in or do anything insane. Instead, they just slowly walked in and stood in front of us. Somehow, just walking in normally like that was scarier. Sarah started to scream, and in response to Sarah screaming, the man in the middle of the group started to scream as well. The woman of the group started to shush Sarah. The man in the middle of the group started to gesture with his hands, almost like a mime. I didn't even realize until that moment that all 3 of them were holding a weird mask that they put on after the man was done gesturing. The masks were so weird. I know that's vague, but I've never quite seen masks like this before. The guy in the middle put on a mask that just looked like a giant purple cube. That's it. No face or anything, just a purple cube. The other man, the one who was screaming, put on a mask that kind of looked like a homemade Batman mask that was made of cardboard. Then the woman put on what looked like a medical mask with plastic icicles you would hang up on the holidays, hanging on each side of the mask, almost like tusks. They slowly started creeping closer to us, and the more we panicked, the louder and more irritated they became. As we screamed, they started to scream as well.
The woman grabbed my shoulders, and because she was so skinny, I was able to push her down. The distraction caused the 2 men to look at the woman. The guy with the purple cube mask shouted that I was going to pay for that. Sarah had a small can of pepper spray on her keychain and started spraying in the direction of the masked people. It gave us enough of a window to run by them. The woman grabbed my ankle as we ran, but I was able to free myself quickly. As I was running away, I looked back and saw the woman reaching behind her in her waistband. I ran to the car as fast as I could. I did not want to wait and find out what she was reaching for. We could still hear them screaming from inside the farmhouse. They didn't chase us for some reason. I remember my vision being a little messed up as well from the spray that must have just been in the air as we ran out of the house. We drove away as fast as we could and made it back home in record time. We didn't actually report this to the police because we figured we're the ones that technically trespassed. Maybe those were the owners, even though I seriously doubt that.
One of the scariest parts of this whole ordeal, for me at least, is that we have no idea where those people came from. They just suddenly appeared in the middle of the night. We explored that entire barn that afternoon, and there was no sign of life. No food, no footsteps, no footprints in the dust, no car, nothing. These deranged, mask-wearing lunatics just showed up out of nowhere with the sole purpose of harming us in some way. I'm still not over the mental scars from that trip. I'm happy I got that girls' trip out of my system, but I'm good if I never go on another cross-country trip again. I'll settle for a nice staycation next time. A few years ago, my girlfriend and I decided to take a road trip across the U.S. This trip was supposed to be important and special because it was when I planned to propose to my now wife. Unfortunately, that's not the only reason the trip is memorable. One of the happiest memories of my life is also plagued by something that nearly ended both of our lives. This is the first time I'm trying to write this story instead of just telling it verbally, and probably the first time I've written anything since high school. I apologize if it's not the greatest literary work of art you've ever heard. For a little bit of backstory, I have a truck with a large cargo bed. It was more than big enough for her and I to lie down on the air mattress in the bed of the truck. We spent days hiking across the country and sleeping in designated areas in the back of my truck. I had camped a few times as a kid with my family, and I always hated setting up tents and sleeping on the ground. Sleeping in the comfort of my truck felt like a hybrid version of camping, and I was here for it. We both love the outdoors, but we'd be the first to admit that we're not the most natural. Every night on the trip was beautiful. We were lucky when it came to the weather. Every night we would fall asleep staring at the sky. And let me just tell you, if you've never gazed at the stars in the wilderness, you need to change that right now. One of the few downfalls of the trip is that my girlfriend was the lightest of light sleepers. Every sound woke her up. We were out in nature, so that means every gust of wind, every bird sound, every tree rustling caused her to wake up. I would always offer her something to help her sleep, but she would always deny it. She said it would make her wake up groggy, apparently more groggy than being half asleep all night. But it wasn't being a light sleeper that kept her awake on this trip. She has a crippling fear of bears. Ever since one of her coworkers told her that her family was attacked by bears on a camping trip, my girlfriend has been on high alert. Every noise she heard on the trip she assumed was a bear. Now, with the backstory out of the way, I'll share what was almost the last night on Earth for my girlfriend and I. About 3/4 of the way through the trip, I proposed, and she said yes. It was one of the happiest days of my life. With the stress of proposing out of the way, I slept like a baby that night. That next morning, she was the most tired she'd been on the entire trip. When I asked her if she was scared of the noises, she kind of paused and didn't answer right away, which is weird behavior for her. She then went on to tell me that she woke up in the middle of the night because she swore she could hear someone walking on the outside of the truck. She stayed lying down so she didn't see anyone, but she was convinced someone was walking just outside the truck bed. Every time she tried to sleep, she could hear the sounds of walking, and she was sure she even heard mumbling or talking at some point. I did believe her. Well, I believe that's what she thought she heard. I wasn't dismissive, but I was pretty sure we weren't being stalked or whatever she thought. Before we left in the morning, she gasped outside the truck. When I ran over, she pointed out what looked like a small footprint in the dirt next to the truck. I was probably being ignorant, but I thought it was a stretch to call it a footprint. I asked if it could possibly have been her footprint, and she instantly protested. I didn't argue with her because I could tell she was still freaked out. I made sure I checked my truck before we left and confirmed we didn't have a secret passenger. I did find in the back seat of my truck that my planner was on the seat, and it was open to the page where I had a list of places we were going to stop each night, but I didn't think anything about it. I figured she was looking at it beforehand, or it's possible that I could have left it there. I put it back in my bag, got ourselves ready, and we hit the road. It took a little while for her to get out of her morning fog, but after a large coffee, she was feeling like herself again and didn't bring up the previous night. We spent the next day just being obnoxiously in love as we hiked through the mountains. Night was approaching, so we set up our little camp nook in the truck bed. I could tell she was a little more uneasy tonight than she had been any other night. It wasn't the bears that were freaking her out. It was the possibility of another person outside the truck. I told her we could sleep inside the locked truck or even find a hotel if she wanted to, but she insisted that we stay in the truck bed, since it was our last night in the wilderness. I decided to stay awake on this night and make sure she fell asleep. It took her a while, but she finally passed out around midnight. I even dug out my old portable DVD player from high school and threw on an old season of Family Guy I had just found, just to get her mind off the silence of the night. The once beautiful silence was now something she was afraid of, even though she would never admit that. I shut the DVD off and rolled over, trying to get some sleep. Before I even dozed off, I thought I heard something outside my truck. My first thought was a baby bear because it sounded bigger than a raccoon or coyote. I thought it was imperative not to wake her up and cause alarm. Slowly and quietly, I crawled to the wall of the truck bed and peered over the edge. I couldn't believe my eyes. Someone was walking around the front of the truck, a smaller figure with a hood on, and they were mumbling something to themselves. I quickly fell back into the truck bed since they didn't see me because they were walking in the opposite direction. I didn't know if I should wake her up or not. I thought that would make too much noise, and right now my main goal was to make as little noise as possible. I thought about trying to tackle the walking person since they looked a lot smaller than me, but I didn't know if they had a weapon or if someone else was hiding nearby to jump me as soon as I made a move. Keeping my fiancée safe was #1 priority. I was listening intently as the figure walked outside. I was able to tell that they were walking outside the truck, and they made their way around and walked by the foot of the truck bed. I tried to angle my head to get a look at the person. I couldn't see the face, but I could tell it was a woman. I could see the blonde hair coming out from the bottom of the hood, and I could clearly hear mumbling at this point, and the voice was unmistakably of a woman. I planned to jump out and confront the woman the next time she passed in front of the truck bed. I was somewhat relieved that my fiancée was asleep for all this. I waited several seconds, but she never made her way back to the truck bed. I leaned over the edge again, and I didn't see her on my side of the truck or the front of the truck. That means she either fled into the woods or was on the other side of the truck that I couldn't see. As fast as I could, I typed into my notes, "Don't make a sound. Someone is outside the truck. I'll distract them, take the keys, start the truck, and I'll jump back into the bed." I quietly woke up my fiancée and made sure the first thing she saw was me holding my finger to my mouth, telling her not to make a sound as I held up the phone for her to read. As quietly as I could, I handed her the key. I could tell she was confused and terrified, but thankfully she didn't make any noise. I grabbed my pocket knife and I jumped outside the truck, trying to scare the intruder away. But nobody was outside the truck. I lowered my guard for a second, and I heard my fiancée yell to me if everything was okay. Just as I was about to answer, I felt intense pain in my ankle. The woman was hiding under the truck, and while I was standing there, she smashed my ankle with a thick tree branch. I stumbled to the ground, and while I was picking myself up, she crawled from underneath the truck, screaming erratically, and she threw the thick branch at me. I put my arms up in defense, and she pulled out what I think was a kitchen knife of some kind, and she started to swing it around crazily. I continued backing away from her insane movements, and once I felt like we were far enough away from the truck, I shouted to my fiancée to start the truck now. She jumped from the side of the truck bed and got to the door. The woman immediately diverted her attention and started running for my fiancée. We were far enough away that she was able to start the truck, and she drove off, leaving a massive cloud of dust. The woman started to scream, and it almost sounded like she was crying. She drove a few feet before turning around and driving straight in the direction of this insane woman. The woman dove out of the way. That's when I finally saw her face. It was my ex-girlfriend. She had some problems when we were younger, but the last I knew, she was doing well. I couldn't believe it. Our breakup was not good. I even had to get the law involved at one point because she would just stalk around the outside of my house in the middle of the night and then claim her only crime was that she was still in love with me. This was also 6 years ago at that point. It's not like this was a fresh wound. Once her hood was off, she fell to her knees and I could see her crying. The usual version of myself would have gone over to make sure she was okay, but not anymore. This woman was clearly not well, and I was not going to take any chances. My fiancée drove by me, and I had more than enough time to open the passenger side door and get in. My ex didn't even try to chase us. We just kept driving. As soon as I was able to get service, I called the police and reported